and I'm going to start recording right now, is to give more updates on what's happening with college, whether it's Long Trail or just higher ed landscape, and then also to answer any questions that you may have. So tonight, I think the topics we're going to be looking at were an update on testing, or maybe a little explanation on testing, visiting colleges during a pandemic, as well as maybe a brief overview of the types of colleges that are out there. So without much further ado, so I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. I'll be doing my best to monitor questions that people have, but certainly you can use kind of the chat function to ask a question, or just unmute yourself and hop in. We look to have a small group of six or seven tonight. So definitely discussion oriented. So don't be bashful. Just unmute and go ahead with your question. All right, I'm going to get going with my screen share here, and I'm going to hop right in to the testing part of things. Let's see. There we go. All right. So there have been historically, there were a lot in our part of the country. We're kind of in SAT territory. So for a long time, that is a test that a lot of people knew, especially if you were growing up on the coasts, with Princeton, New Jersey, kind of being a headquarters. The SAT has loomed large over our corner of the country for a long time. In the middle of the country, historically, your Iowas, your Denvers, it was ACT land. And so that was certainly the more popular test. Over the last couple of decades, maybe since some of the parents here, if you went to college, that maybe these are the tests you were potentially taking, and you probably only took one. What's happened in the last couple of decades is that the ACT grew in prominence and started becoming a state test. And so the state of Colorado, with its million-plus students, were now using the ACT, and it gained in popularity. And then you saw a lot more students taking both. For a brief while, the ACT was the most taken test in this country. I'm talking probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It was the most more popular of the tests. The SAT came roaring back, and they added state testing. So Connecticut hopped on, and I believe the last I knew, they kind of went back into the lead in terms of who had the most students tested. So these tests have been battling. They're the Coke and Pepsi going back. You know, they're both bubble tests. You're going to be on a Saturday morning sitting down, filling in bubbles for a long period of time. But there are some differences. Or I would like to be more clear. There were more differences up until about 5 years ago. So once the ACT really started being a bigger threat to the SAT, and made some changes, less so into the content, but more maybe in terms of the strategy. So one of the big ones, for example, was the ACT used to, the ACT never had a guessing penalty. And so, excuse me, and so that meant leave nothing blank. You know, if you're down to 2 minutes left on the test and you have 8 questions left on bubbled, just go A, and you're going to get some points probably out of that with no points lost. The SAT, on the other hand, did have a guessing penalty, and so there was some strategy there. It used to be, look, if you can eliminate one of four or five choices and make it a guess down to 1 and 4, then mathematically, the way they had the scoring structured, it was worth guessing. But those are the kind of little tricks that made the SAT made a little bit unpopular. It was made a little bit less straightforward. The SAT dropped that, and they dropped the guessing penalty. So same thing on the SAT. Don't leave anything blank. Fill in whatever you can if you're getting close to the end. There are some differences. So and then on the other hand, the ACT, there's a process called super scoring on the SAT. So if you take the SAT multiple times, and on the first one, you get a 500 on the verbal and 500 on the math, and you take it again, and this time you got a 600 on the verbal and a 400 on the math. Both times you took the score, So you have 1,000 on both ones. Your total score was 1,000 on both those test dates. But the way super scoring would work, it would take the highest two subsections or whatever of how many tests you took. In this case, it would take the 600 from the second test in the verbal, but keep the 500 from in the math from the first. So you actually score your super score was an 1100, and 99.99 something percent of colleges use super score. It's one of those everybody gets to win. They get to report higher averages, students get to use higher numbers, and that was one of the advantages the SAT had, because the ACT for a long time said our test is not meant for super scoring, and so colleges didn't do it. And then finally, I don't know, about 3 or 4 colleges wouldn't do it officially. They would sometimes do it unofficially. About 3 or 4 years ago, the dam just kind of broke, and colleges are now super scoring the ACT. Definitely not all of them. We're talking 400 or 500 and more colleges hopping on, and you're now seeing the ACT allowing students to do their own version of taking a section over again, where the SAT, maybe you just want to improve your math section, but you got to take the whole test over. The ACT last year put on hold for the pandemic, but coming out maybe next year would allow you to take that science section again if that's what you wanted. So there are changes in the process or the rules to those two tests. So they have, over the last couple of years, become more similar. When I first got to Long Trail, so this is now almost about 14 years ago, definitely a lot more popular SAT, a little bit less so ACT, but I found that students that were really doing well in the classroom, but maybe not getting the SAT score that they had hoped, I would usually recommend the ACT. I had found that students, a good portion of students scored about the same. They're not on the same scale, and I'll discuss that in a second. But when we looked at it, some students were scoring about the same, but in the group that scored a little bit or significantly higher, meaningfully higher than one than the other, for those students, it was usually the ACT was a stronger one. And so I don't know what it was about Long Trail or our students with the ACT, but it typically worked well. Unfortunately, I think some of those changes have diminished, and I'm not as strong in my recommendation that students need to do both now. I could probably say maybe pick one and focus on that, but that's been a change in my philosophy. I still encourage students to maybe try both, at least a practice test to get a sense. And now I'm going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into where these tests differ, maybe on content. So right now we are a test center for the SAT, meaning that on Saturdays in the fall, and you can see over here on the right side here, that on one Saturday a month in these months, we would give the SAT here at Long Trail. We were open to any student. We would have students coming over from sometimes Upper Marlington, over from Salem, sometimes BVA students or a student visiting, and we were open for that. One of the reasons we shut that down this year is because we were fully open, and we were having students register from outside the state. So this year we moved to what's called school day testing, but my hope is that we're back to being a national test center and having the Saturday testing for this fall on. So I'm gonna get back to where I am right here. These are those 7 dates that are the 7 months that they have in there. You'll see over on the ACT, there also are 7 months, but there are some differences, like they have a September, but not in August. They don't have a November. They have a earlier in the February start than April. So they're usually within 1 or 2 weeks of each other. So like for the August SAT, it's usually the last weekend of August. The September ACT is usually the first weekend of September, depending on when Labor Day may fall. But both of these, you're going to have several opportunities to test. We're not an ACT test center, so we don't give it on Saturdays, but certainly anywhere from Pulteney, SMS, BBA, as well as I think maybe Salem offers it as a site location. So pretty easy to find places to take these tests. Looking how the two tests are structured, you're going to see a little bit of difference. SAT 5 minutes longer. I think when you're sitting for 3 hours, I don't know if 5 minutes is a huge difference, but technically SAT is the longer one. Although it's longer, it asks a significant amount of fewer questions. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. You're going to see the breakdown of the test. On the SAT, you're going to start off with a 65-minute section. That's your longest section of the test, and it's reading 52 questions. So that averages out, and I think they say down here, you have a minute and a quarter on per question on that section. You're going to get a 10-minute break, and then you dive into the writing and language. Now, the writing part is a little bit of a misnomer. You're not going to actually do any free writing. What you're going to be doing in this case is improving. They're going to ask you, how can this text be improved? So that's more what that writing and language gets after. The reading part is a little bit more about reading comprehension and answering questions related to the text. The writing and language is more about improving text through grammar and that type of thing. So that's a 35-minute section. You quickly go into the first of two math sections, and it's a 25-minute section. There's 48 seconds per question, 48 seconds to answer each question in the writing and language. In the math question, it is back to 75 seconds per question. You have 20 questions to answer in 25 minutes, no calculator. You have a 5-minute break, and then you come back in for the next longest section, and that is, hold on a second. Oh, yes, I can do that. Thank you. Hopefully that's a little bit better for people. And that's a great suggestion. Thank you for doing that. All right. So here we are back to those sections. I'll do a quick little repeat here. 65 minutes in the first, 35 minutes in the section, and the second, 25 minutes in the first math section, which is the third, followed by a break, and then you're in that home stretch with math calculator. So both these questions on the SAT have what are called free response. There's about 4 questions at the end where they give you blocks to fill in your own answer. So this is not choosing from 4 or 5 existing answers. This is you answering 4.124 or 0.12 or whatever it may be. So that's a little bit different. There's nothing like that on the ACT. You're going to see over here, that's the grid-ins I just discussed. You're going to see on the math section that those questions do increase in difficulty. And as I alluded to before, there's no penalty for wrong or skipped answers. Shifting over to the ACT here. Oh, yes, big difference. Still a big difference on the scoring. SAT 2 sections scored between 200 and 800 points, 800 being perfect on a section. 2 perfect sections would get you a 1600. So your total score is 1400 to about a 1600. The ACT is on a much different scale. They're on a 1 to 36. If you ever want to be able to convert your 2 scores, honestly, just Google convert ACT to SAT. You're going to find a chart, and then you'll be able to just convert your 2 scores. But they are on very different scales. You're going to see they also saw the test with an English section, and this again is reading comprehension and as well as some grammar that's in there. The thing I want to point out the most is that you have 45 minutes to answer 75 questions. And so that is 36 seconds per question. That highlights probably the #1 thing students say about the ACT. They're basically, in a nutshell, is I felt I can answer the questions, I just didn't have enough time. And so that one, you need to work on your pacing a little bit more. But that's usually the biggest complaint with the ACT is they just give you a lot to do in a limited amount of time. You go right from that English section into the math section. There's only 1 math section on the ACT. It is calculator based. And then I believe that is the longest section on the test. You have a 15-minute break. That's a little bit longer than you see in with the SAT. And then you go into the reading section, which is, more of the reading comprehension. And then finally, there's a section called science on the ACT. Some students are going into STEM fields. So if you're going into science, technology, engineering, math, some students have a preference for the ACT because it has a science section. The science section really isn't science, and they're not going to ask you any physics questions, or they're not going to test your knowledge of chlorophyll or gravity, or about polar bears. It is basically, here's a graph, here's a chart. Can you read data? And I really wish they would call this data interpretation instead of science, but it's called science. And so some students going into that feel like they like having that section with there. Same thing, they have a pure math section. So I less strong in my belief that's the reason to take the ACT, but if you feel that science section is a way for you, it's an area for you to shine, then certainly the ACT allows you to do that. The essay, so the ACT has an optional essay. You're going to see that word optional. You're going to see nothing over here on the SAT. The reason why is just about 6 weeks ago, the SAT came out with some really big news. They dropped the essay. Not even that, it used to be optional. You'd spend an extra, I don't know, $15 and 50 minutes, and you would get this writing score. There were essentially no colleges still requiring that essay from it. It was down to a small handful, and probably to the point all of them were going to drop off or just make it purely optional. The SAT the College Board kind of saw that coming, and they just got rid of it altogether, as well as something called subject tests, and I'll briefly talk on those in a second. The ACT kept it. I wouldn't be surprised if after this year it's also gone for them as well. I feel pretty confident to say if you are taking one of these tests, you can do it without taking the writing. Just saves you time, saves you some stress. This writing thing, to be honest, was added in 2005 when the state of California, with its many million students, kind of threatened to drop the SAT because they didn't feel it was testing their writing well enough, and the SAT responded to that demand by adding that section. And even though colleges never asked for it, they didn't know really what to do with it. And now, whatever, 16 years later, that whole experiment looks to be kind of ending. So I alluded to just 2 minutes ago something called SAT subject tests. These have been called a lot of different things over the years: achievement tests, subject tests, SAT 2s. They were required by only 1 or 2 colleges in the pandemic. Both those colleges, like Caltech, dropped the requirement. And there were some where it was problematic was that still a lot of colleges were highly recommending them. These tended to be selective schools that were taking, less than 1 in 9 or 10 applicants. And it was to the point where if you probably weren't doing it, you were at a competitive disadvantage. So it was really a de facto requirement. And it just caused a lot of students because what you can't do, you couldn't take the SAT and a subject test on the same Saturday. You got to take them on separate test dates. So you really had to put a lot of thought into, I'm going to take the SAT on this day, the subject test on this day. And the College Board kind of saw the writing on the wall as more colleges were moving away from it, that they also dropped those as well. So the SAT, ACT picture has gotten simpler for students. And as it's gotten simpler, it's also losing some prominence. I'm going to hop off the screen shared for just a brief second, just to see if anyone else has any questions over my 20-minute dense SAT versus ACT primer. Okay, now that I've gone through all of that, I'm now going to say these tests I'm going to go back to my share screen. These tests are losing prominence. And when I say that, what I mean is that most colleges during the pandemic went test optional. They eliminated the requirement of an SAT or ACT. Prior to the pandemic, there were about 1,000 colleges and universities, and they were on this website called fairtest.org. And you're going to recognize some of these schools you'll not recognize, some of these schools you will. I can sort it by state real quickly here. But what happened was the pandemic, they kind of said, you know what, we're dropping this test requirement. Students aren't able to test. Test centers were closing left and right. we were going to be a test center in April. We had to close. We actually tested last March 14th, and then school closed on the 16th. And then we did no more SATs all the way through. Other states were like California, Florida, all those test centers were closed. There were hundreds of thousands of students that couldn't test. Colleges responded to this situation by dropping that requirement. And so what's going to happen now? Right now, I get a lot of emails every day, and a lot of the emails that are coming my way are basically along the lines of, we're extending our test optional policy for the next 1 year, 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised if more colleges dropped it altogether. So it is looking very likely that you, particularly I'm talking about the juniors, potentially the sophomores in this group, will be able to apply to a college without a test score. Schools are making it test optional, which means that if you have a score and you want to use it, you're going to go ahead and use it. If you have a score that may not help your file, you now have the choice of not submitting it. We had our seniors, and we've had test optional admissions for a while, and I can definitely think of several students that applied to a school test optional. Probably if their SAT scores were a factor, they may not have gotten into that school, but lo and behold, they got to that school, and they have always done amazing things, kind of proving maybe these SAT or ACT scores don't necessarily show everything that they purport to show, or some people believe that they do show. But then in this past year, we definitely saw a greater use of the test optional option by our seniors. And we had, probably some decisions from students that if scores were again involved, they may not have had the same reaction or the same decision. And again, like the students in the past, I'm guessing these students are going to go to college, and because of the preparation Long Trail provides, that the hard work students do, that they're going to get to those colleges and just do amazing things. So I want to point out, how did this end up looking? And so right now, and this is an article just from 2 days ago, so this is really pretty fresh data. Only 44% of those that apply to college through the Common App. The Common App is a central application platform. The vast majority of schools that Long Trail students apply to are on the Common App. It's probably up to about 900 colleges. It handles millions of applications a year by 3-4 million students, but each one submitting on average 4 or 5. So you're into several million applications. But you're seeing this year that a good portion of these students, 44%, applied without submitting scores. Where was that last year? It was at 77%. I would probably say if we could look at the 2 years ago, was probably somewhere in the 80s. But that's going from 77 to 44 is a huge drop. What you're going to see, I think, like a lot of colleges saw application increases, and have been happy that they got rid of this requirement. I am guessing they're going to be very happy with the classes they're bringing in, and a lot of them are not going to bring back those tests. Now, some places, maybe like a military academy, West Point, I can see them. They never dropped it. I can see them keeping it. A school like Cornell, when they announced going test optional in the fall, the reluctance, it was just pouring off the page. They were like, we really don't want to do this, but we understand it's tough to get a test right now. But we expect that if you can test, that you will, and you will send the score. And we are going to be going back to having a test as soon as we can. So there's still that gamut. That was their stance, 7 months ago. They probably had a great year with applications. They may be softening on that. So coming out of this, scores are losing prominence. But also looking at the seniors this year, I would say that some students, most of our seniors were able to test. I talked about being an SAT test center on these dates on a Saturday. Well, this year was not going to be, I think, a safe move on our part from a COVID perspective. So we moved to what was called SAT School Day. We offered 3 SATs in the fall. We're currently offering 3 SATs this spring to juniors only on 2 Wednesdays and a Tuesday, where they get to take those tests. I am again hoping that we are moving back to that different model, and that we have more opportunities on Saturdays to do it. But that is what we're currently offering right now. Although the pandemic decreased the amount of applications overall to colleges, the one thing it didn't do, overall it did decrease. A good portion of that was in the community college sector. And while we do send usually 1 or 2 students a year onto a 2-year college, the vast majority of Long Trail students are looking at 4-year institutions. And what we saw was coming out of through March 1 was that a lot of those types of institutions actually saw gains in applications, and anywhere from 2% in the private, large, less selective, and I think the average is about 2%. So they're somewhere just a little above an average increase in year. But you saw a private, large, more selective. So that might be, say, like a Northeastern, BU, BC, that category of school. They had a huge increase in their applicant pool. They had, let's see, some other ones. The private, more selective, the small. So your Williams College, your Middlebury's, they were not hurt by the pandemic. They actually saw a huge jump in applications. So competition increased at these places. These places, especially if you're looking at someone that have this more selective group. And for those that are listening to me for the first time, I'm going to say it now, and this is my mantra. I don't ever equate selectivity with quality, meaning that the more selective a school is, the better it is. There are some phenomenal institutions, colleges that offer an amazing academic experience that take in 75% of the students. Part of that is because it's a unique school with a unique philosophy, so it attracts a kind of a self-selecting group of students. But I don't ever equate those two things. However, looking at these numbers, it is important to realize that looking at schools where the acceptance rate's 11%, 10%, that there are some things that you could do to maybe increase those chances. And that brings me back to those scores again. So with these big increases in numbers, one thing I did see from some of our seniors this year, if you had a score, if you had an SAT or ACT score that was historically in that college's average, I think those students typically had an advantage when applying. So I'm trying to set it up and going forward that as we move more into test optional, that students have the opportunity to test, to understand that where the SAT or ACT fits into their application, and also let them know that there are many possibilities and avenues to go to college without having it. But if students want to have a test, then certainly taking advantage of our school day testing, test prep are going to go a long way to getting a score that might move the needle in terms of getting into colleges. Okay, so there's my testing, and why I'm on that last category before I kind of switch gears into the types of schools. I just want to add, when colleges look at recommend applications, and tomorrow my juniors are going to be doing a mock application exercise where they've been given 4 files to read over the last couple of weeks, and tomorrow is decision day, and they need to only choose 1 out of 4. But when we're looking at applications, or when we're sending an application, when colleges are reviewing applications, the things they're looking at are going to be your transcript. First and foremost, your grades are the most important thing. The courses you took, with Long Trail being an IB school, that definitely is the bulk of our curriculum. But you might choose a higher level or an SL level. So the level of course that you're taking, the grades that you're getting, the pattern of grades that you have, did you start off with all A's, and by the time you were a senior, you were more towards the C and you're kind of on that downward trend? Or was it vice versa? You started 9th grade, maybe, B's and C's. By the time you got to senior year, you're all A's and you're on that upward trend. All those things kind of come in. So definitely GPA and transcript are always number 1 on college criteria. Those SAT scores, I think a lot of people kind of thought they were second. Maybe at some schools they were. They're usually pretty further down the list. I think as we go forward and coming out of the pandemic, they're going to probably continue to tumble down a couple more spots on the rungs of the ladder. Letters of recommendation, your essay, your extracurriculars, all those type of things. Those are going to be the criteria that colleges are basing on. Now, again, if scores come into play, they'll fit back in there. But we saw a lot of great decisions this year on students that did not submit scores, and it's gone very well for them. So, right here is just a current updated list of where our current seniors have gotten in. If you see a name in bold, like down here, that is where they will be attending in the fall. This list is, I'm very happy. I'm really excited for our seniors. This looks like similar to previous year's list where tests were involved. And so I think, we're proving and colleges are seeing that you can do this process without those SAT scores. So again, they're still a factor. They're losing prominence. I'm still going to be recommending that students have an SAT score. I still think there's going to be an advantage. Maybe 5 years from now, I might have a different message, but currently that's where I am at. All right, now we're going to switch gears. Types of colleges. I'm going to kind of do this a little bit briefly. I'm already half an hour in. I'm trying to keep these a little bit lighter. There are, so college and university, those are the big two titles. Those are also very American terms. We say going to college. I think if you were over in England, they would say, she's going to university or she's a university student. They do that there because college in a lot of parts of the world is what we equate to high school, or what they equate to high school there. And so we see that in American way, that we have college and university, where most other countries just have university. A long time ago, there probably were more significant differences between colleges and universities. There's still, in a broad way, there's still a couple differences. In general, colleges tend to be smaller. I can think of Ithaca College at 5,000 students being the biggest one that I've come across. Most are going to be in that 2,000 student range, and certainly, down to 1,000. You have Bennington, 40 minutes south here, that's in the 600 student range. But colleges tend to be on the smaller end. It used to also mean that it was purely focused on the undergraduate experience. So no graduate school, no graduate degrees. That's where things started changing. You started seeing colleges offering master's degrees and doing a little bit more on the graduate level, maintaining the word college, but offering a little bit more. Universities were typically larger, maybe a little bit more research oriented. However, I think colleges would bristle if you say that research is not happening on, or science is not happening on a 2,000 student campus. I think there is a lot more research going on, just as universities, even though they're larger. I think they would bristle if you kind of accuse them of being impersonal or too big. But universities where usually a little bit more research happened, a little bit larger than the colleges, usually probably starting in the 3,000 or 4,000 student and going up now to 65 to 75,000, whether you're talking like Arizona State or Central Florida. Universities might have within them several colleges, little silos, a college of business, a college of engineering, medicine, law of agriculture. And sometimes when you go to a university, you might apply to a certain college within a university. University is probably going to have more offerings in terms of degrees, but you also might have that 500 student class. So think about more, thinking a traditional year of being in the theater with 220 students. That's what your intro to psychology class might look like. You might like that. Coming out of Long Trail, where you've got classes of 10 or 12 students, that might be a little bit of an adjustment. But adjustments and growing are good. All right, so a little further down the list, another category, liberal arts. I think, when I was looking at colleges, it was really like you had what were called like research universities and liberal arts colleges. And again, I think what's evolved in the last couple of years is that they've kind of really filled in the spectrum, even to the point where the famous U.S. News and World Report had also kind of changed their categories of things. They've added things such as regional universities. For a brief period of time, they were calling things like comprehensive colleges, which was a mix of pre-professional and liberal arts majors within a school. The term liberal arts, I think is a little bit at times a misnomer, in this day and age with political terms, liberal versus conservative. I think that kind of steals a little bit of thunder from what it's supposed to intend. But it's really supposed to be a broad based exposure to a variety of different things. So you're leaving here knowing a little bit about a variety of different subjects. Some people love that well-roundedness. I could also make an argument that if you're going to go study engineering, that you just want to study engineering, and you can definitely find places where that can be done. Another type of school that's out there would be the community college or junior college. In our part of the country, you hear more of the using of the word community college, two-year college. We have CCB in Vermont that has locations like, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 physical locations, plus a growing and strong online presence. Typically one of the most affordable routes to a college degree, usually a 2-year option. We usually have about 1 student a year looking at that, with those students then maybe thinking about a 4-year college after those 2 years. So a great and viable route. That is one of the sectors that probably got hit most by the pandemic, but hopefully it will bounce back as we come out of there. Military Academy. If you read our e-news, you might have heard one of our seniors was a Long Trail first and was both accepted. His appointment was accepted, and he accepted his appointment to West Point, and that is our first military academy student. West Point Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, Coast Guard Academy, as well as Citadel, Norwich, VMI. These are all possible options for students, and certainly it's exciting. I do find when a Long Trail student kind of creates their own path to a new school, that you sometimes see interest follow that for the next couple of years. We've also had students go into ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, or National Guard, to reap the educational benefits, where they're basically having the U.S. government pay for a vast majority of their school. Engineering or STEM focused colleges. So this could be a little bit more like a RIT, MIT, WPI type situation, a Clarkson to some degree. These are ones that usually are going to be focused on areas in the STEM, engineering, science, usually may not as much medicine, but certainly technology and engineering. They usually also have a strong business major at those colleges as well. In terms of Long Trail, ones that have been popular have been Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston, WPI, RPI, RIT have been some popular options within that category. For vocational technical school, so we have sent a handful of students, whether it's up to Vermont Tech. These are usually 1 to 2 year degrees. They usually might lead to a certification to allow a student to go into automotive. So we've had students go into automotive. We have had students go into like forestry from those types of programs. So within our state, we have Vermont Technical College up in Randolph and some other locations. You also find some fast track nursing programs within that category as well, which segues nicely into the next category, nursing school. I would probably say, from Long Trail perspective, we usually see students pursue a nursing degree within a college that has a nursing major, more so than we see students going to a pure nursing school. That category exists. I think the category of that brand is slowly shrinking as more 4-year, 2-year colleges offer RNs and BSN offer options. Last and certainly not least would be art schools. And so we usually are sending a student, if not 1, 2 or 3, into visual arts, music, theater, or directing every year. We'll probably have 2 students coming out of the senior class looking to major in art. And so we have sent students on to whether it's, Maine College of Art, Mass Art right now is very popular. That's Massachusetts College of Art and Design. One of the reasons it's popular, it is a state school, a part of the New England Higher Education Board. And so Vermont students, because we don't necessarily have an art college here in the public system, they can go to Mass Art for a special tuition rate. So Mass Art has been popular. RISD, we certainly send applications to. But then we also have students pursuing art at more liberal arts or pre-professional type schools. It might be like a Leslie in there. So art can happen at a lot of places, but we definitely are sending students to schools where they get to do art and pretty much only art. So in a broad sense, those are those categories of schools, and these are just within the U.S. Certainly Canada, we're not that far from the border. They tend to be larger research institutions. The small liberal arts colleges is certainly a very American thing, but you can certainly leave the U.S. and find some amazing experiences. And we have, a student going on to Wales this previous year, and usually looking at Canada as well as the UK. We had Netherlands last year. So wide variety of options that are out there. All right, my last category for the night is, and again, just while we're looking at going to finish up this category of schools, here are rankings. I am aware these rankings exist. I certainly take a look at them just to be abreast of what's going on with the rankings, but I definitely do not study or memorize them. I think it is a helpful guide, but it does not drive my long trail process. And so I'm definitely aware and can point out and help you dig in, and there is some nice research that's in here, but it is not a resource I put too much weight on as I help seniors develop their lists. All right, this last category is how do we visit schools in a pandemic? Well, there are a couple different things to consider. So one is some colleges are opening up their campuses for visits. Here is a crowdsourced option. So you kind of see some down here in Massachusetts that are doing it. University of New England in Maine is beginning to offer in-person visits this spring. I would be a bad long trail health officer if I didn't say, there would be some travel quarantine implications with current Vermont rules. But if you are going April to visit your cousin and they live in north of Boston, and you're going to probably be doing some quarantining, then maybe use that time to also see a campus. I think seeing a campus is really helpful. I know we've gone virtual, and virtual has filled in a big void that we could have had. But I think getting out and seeing campuses and the surrounding area is still my ideal for you. And so hopefully as we see some travel restrictions begin to be peeled away, and we see the vaccinations increase, that we may see more opportunity to get out and visit some of those campuses. Right now within Vermont, I have not seen too many campuses that are open for personal visits. Here's UVM for right now. Basically, a lot of the campuses have this kind of message. A lot of the Vermont campuses have this kind of message that we are not able to welcome visitors, but here are some options. And then they give you the ability to register for a live panel, and maybe get also and then there's also virtual tours as well. There are some campuses that are doing, and we're actually doing that here for our prospective students, where a student at, say, Lynn University down in Florida, they take an iPad and they actually bring you on the tour that you would have walked. And so it's not a canned virtual tour, it's an individualized iPad tour that they've given. And I've heard of a couple other campuses doing that. So everyone's trying to give you a taste of their campus. And again, I really hope some things open up in terms of visit options as we move into the spring. Certainly the summer for the younger students, summer is another great time to visit campus. If you're going to visit, again, a relative somewhere, if they don't live near campus, the chances that you're driving past 20 to get to that place, is pretty strong, especially if you're in the Northeast. So when things open up, I do encourage students to visit a campus, and not necessarily always a campus that you think you're going to like. I think there's some value in looking at a school that might be the polar opposite. So an example might be, I'm thinking about going to a small, more rural type institution. I would want you to go look at a big or more urban institution, just so you kind of hear how they talk about their education, and how the smaller, the one that you think might be the best for you, talks about their education as well. Sometimes when students go and visit only the type of school they want, they come back and they'll tell me how excited they are that the school has study abroad, that they have 3 meals a day, that they have this 24-hour library, that intramural sports, that you get to work with professors, not knowing that most of those things are available on a wide variety of campuses. And so, so I think seeing a range of schools really helps you just solidify, if you think, again, small rural, then going to visit that range will help you solidify that really is the right choice for you. So until that time, until we can go and visit schools, what are the next best things? And it's going to be those virtual tours. It's going to be using a service. All high school students in grades 9 through 12 have access to this website called the service called SCORE. They'll just be able to log in with their Long Trail address. But what it is, it's a great, at this point, it's a great college search engine. I've already kind of pre-selected a couple of these schools right here. Here's Merrimack College. So this is what SCORE pulls up. SCORE gives you a lot of information about a particular school. So this is a great way to do research, that you can see what the acceptance rate is. You can see that this is a religious school, and I should have talked about that category among schools as well. That there are certainly Catholic Jesuit schools, as well as Protestant Christian colleges. That's where there's Jewish colleges. So there is, and we do have students that put that in or have that be one of the factors in their search. Merrimack is one of these Catholic Jesuit schools. You can see up here the tuition. It's a private college, so it doesn't matter if you're from Massachusetts or if you're from Nevada, that you're paying the same. You're going to probably anticipate room and board coming in about $15,000, so their total cost is probably somewhere in the low 50s. Even though it's in the low 50s, the majority of students are paying probably about 3/5 of that in the low 30s. So this is just some of the information it provides. Merrimack is test optional, so they stopped reporting their scores. They accept about 8 out of 10 applications. And then you can also see just down through here the application options. So they can take the Common App, which I alluded to earlier. SAT scores are optional right now. And then you see the variety of test or application options. In terms of size, there's that 3,000 student campus that I was talking about. About 8 out of 10 students come back for the sophomore year. That's certainly a nice number. I think when you start getting below 75, when you got to think about, you have 3 other friends, it probably means one of you would not be coming back. So I do pay attention to that. I do pay attention to the retention. And a number like 8, above 80 is one I feel comfortable with. Gender diversity broken down pretty evenly. Sometimes you will see one skew a little bit more to the other, maybe a 60-40 mix, and then you also get the ethnic diversity as well. Down in this screen, I think this is interesting. You get to see what the most popular majors of the school are. I don't think you necessarily need to be in the most popular category, but I also want you to be in the 1% as well. So right here, you get to kind of see really where the groups that make up the bulk of where the students are studying. And then down here is a full listing of all of the majors. And you can see within the business major, they offer several different options from accounting down to marketing. That's there. Here it is again, and this is probably a little bit more for parents, but again, the average cost coming in, that net price, and then you can also see that average price by income band. And then last but not least is a map to give you a little sense of place. This one's just a little north of Boston by the New Hampshire border. It does, which led me to this place, it does offer a virtual tour. Not every college is going to have this, but you get this little virtual test tour guide, and you get to move around through the campus. And so this is certainly a nice option to use until you can start visiting campuses again. I'm just quickly going to show a public university, just give you a little comparison in the data. So again, you see that there is a difference between out of state and in states. If you're from New Hampshire, you're paying a little under 15. If you're from Vermont, it's about double that. Again, they have, in this case, this one has a little bit more. They give you little tidbits. These ones down here, these are from the University of New Hampshire, so it could feel a little bit of marketing in there, but this is still, you can get a sense of stories and voices from students at the University of New Hampshire. Here's your averages, about 1165. Long Trail average SAT score is usually a little above 1200, just to put things in perspective. They're accepting about 3/4 of their applicants. And again, you can see the ways that you can apply down through there. 85% of students are coming back. 13,000 students, so a little bit bigger than UVM, which is more about 10,000 students in terms of undergrads. You can see where the students are coming from. Not surprising that the largest group are coming from New Hampshire, but certainly Massachusetts is actually not that far behind. There again, you see a little bit more of 54-60-46 balance in gender. And then here are the most popular majors at the school. Here you can kind of see the breakdown by price. So here is that average. I will say, when you're looking at in-state for a public university, this number might be a little bit difficult because you're working with two different tuition groups that are there. And there you are down in Durham. All right, I am going to stop screen sharing and hop back over to you. Hi, everybody. That was a lot of the topics I wanted to cover tonight. I actually went a couple minutes over. I still have that tendency to pack a lot in. I know in the future we'll be talking about Long Trail, the next one, Long Trail resources, in terms of the website score. We're going to talk about a little bit more. Use Science. I know a couple of our older students, or our high school students that I have in class, are familiar with those. So we'll be diving into that, those topics. We'll do and I'll be giving them kind of an admissions update, and then the another one I'll be giving, the final one I'll be giving another update as well. So I want to end tonight with just an opportunity to see if anyone has any questions, whether it's something I presented tonight or it's something that was totally unrelated. I just want to get that chance to give you the opportunity to answer those questions or ask those questions. Okay, well, if that is the case, I'm going to say, oh, can you share SAT and ACT tutors? Okay, yes, great question. So what we have right now, I put out there, and I'll see if I could find it again. Locally, prior to the pandemic, we had 1 or 2 options of people that did SAT prep. I have not heard from them during this year. Local options, when I say local, I know we have families come from Rutland to Bennington, up the mountain. Local to our area is Maple Street does some like power weekends where you're going to do test prep from 9 to 3 Saturdays, and 2 Saturdays and Sundays. They do these in the spring, and then they do these in the fall. That's one option. I am right in front of my office right now. I have old-fashioned $25 SAT book. I have a library of these. I'm happy to loan these out for students. There's a practice test in here. So this requires a little bit more self-discipline. It's definitely the most economical route to go. But this is one, probably the most old school. There is Khan Academy. All students have access to Khan Academy through Long Trail. Khan Academy is the official SAT prep. And there is, I want to say almost an endless amount of exercises within there to get ready for the SAT. The ACT has something called ACT Academy, and it seems to have quietly kind of faded away. If you were a simple, Google ACT prep, free ACT prep, you're going to very easily come across some ACT questions. With the SAT dropping that guessing penalty and dropping some of the things that were more about strategy than they were about what you knew, I think once they kind of dropped that and those hints went away, it's more just about, I think, prep. And so students can do that. What I did many decades ago, I got together, and again, this would be coming out of a pandemic, but I got together with 3 or 4 other families. Sunday mornings, one parent would lead an SAT prep, and we would do one practice test, one 60-minute English section, and we sit down, we score it together, and we go through it. And so all those options are there. If you are open to online, then you have Princeton Review, Kaplan. There are probably 6 or 7 very well-known Veritas prep companies that you can get online, and it could be anywhere from like $30 a month for recorded lessons to more expensive one-on-one to very expensive, several hundred, $1,500, $1,600 to very highly individualized online prep. So a lot of different options that are there. But I do find that students that do some degree of prep work, and sorry, students, I'll say doing the question of the day from the College Board does not count as prep work. But students that do put in the work usually do see their scores increase. Interestingly, several years ago, the College Board said SAT prep does nothing. Prepping for this, our tests are not preppable, because they thought that test prep, that industry, was advantaging the more affluent students, and the SAT said no, our test can't be prepped for. And then like 5 years later, they kind of rolled out this big announcement: Khan Academy is our official SAT prep person. So I think they finally came around to the fact that SAT prep makes a difference. I think the fact that Princeton Review and Kaplan and all those others are making so much money off of test prep is also showing that test prep makes a difference. And so I do find doing it on your own or doing one of these courses makes a difference. Any other questions? But I will, when on that end, when Maple Street does post their SAT Power Weekend, I will post that on and try to get that information out both in e-news and onto my classroom boards. Anything else? All right, 7:59. I kept it under an hour. That's good for me. I hope everyone has an awesome night. Hopefully I'll see you back here in 2 weeks, and then a month after that. So happy Wednesday, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.